What's up, girls? I just read Carl Jung's Modern Man in Search of a Soul. Um, this is the second Carl Jung book that I've read. I read it right after reading Man and His Symbols, which is his introductory work, and then I just read online this would be a great next book to read. It's a collection of 11 essays. They're very fascinating. He spends a lot of time. First of all, in the first essay, he talks about dream interpretation and how dreams should not be treated as emblematic of issues going on with the conscious mind, or they should not be viewed as like messages. He says that dreams should be treated as if they're a real event that has actually happened to you. I guess I haven't read Freud really, but I guess he's kind of responding to Freud's dream analysis, and for example, Freud would say like, oh, if you had a dream that all of your teeth were falling out, that just means you're anxious, and then they would kind of stop there, and then Carl Jung would say in response to that, it's actually much more subjective than that. It depends on the person, it depends on what's going on in their life, it depends on their unconscious, which is kind of unaccessible, and so you kind of just have to pay attention to your dream and treat it as if it actually happened to you, which I think is really cool. I've been writing down my dreams the last couple weeks, and they've been becoming more vivid as a result. And I've been relating it to my writing, which is really cool because like I feel like a lot of the times for fiction writing, I think in the image first of what I'm imagining happens, and then I kind of ascribe words and like a dramatic structure, or like a this and then this happens and this happens and this happens kind of thing, and that's pretty interesting when you're writing, but it's very like intentional. You kind of sit down and you're like, I'm going to try to imagine the next thing that happens in this book. And when you wake up from dreaming and you write down your dream, it's almost a little bit passive. It's like you didn't decide to dream that, but you're then transcribing it into written word and trying to express it as best as you can, which is pretty cool. I think creativity is also kind of passive, in that like you don't completely determine the ideas that come to you. You have to just be like willing to receive them based on your experiences and your taste and intuition and certain things. Okay, what else? He spends a lot of the book responding to Freud. One of the main claims he makes is that Freud's kind of psychological system is incomplete. The system that revolves around sex, basically, and childhood development. And he says that Freud really pulls a lot of his psychology like out from himself, and that a lot of the things that Freud determines to be universally or true are actually only true for Freud, but that there are many different types in the world that are not the same as Freud, and so these universal laws or rules for psychology don't actually really exist, which I think is cool. I think it also, that also kind of lines up with postmodern literature. Once you get, modern kind of creates types, and then postmodern becomes like, character becomes so important, and subjectivity becomes like incredibly important in drama and literature and film. So that was kind of cool to see that like psychological field also has like a similar arc towards subjectivity. He at one point talks about neuroses developing because one of his patients has morally transgressed. Talks about a boy who, basically was having these problems and couldn't figure out why, and then Jung eventually discovered that he had a childhood teacher that was not very wealthy but infatuated with him, and she was paying for him to spend his winter vacations in St. Moritz and his summer vacations in Nice, at much personal expense and kind of her own detriment. And the patient didn't view it as an issue because she offered it to him of like her own free will. But Jung's takeaway that he knew kind of deep in his psyche that it was morally wrong to take from her because she wasn't able to give to him, and that really disturbed him and gave him a bunch of neuroses. This book was like full of so many of Jung's famous quotes, which was cool because I've like seen him on Instagram and stuff for like such a long time and like talked to people about him. One of my favorite Jung quotes was in this book, which is, it's not Goethe that creates Faust, but Faust creates Goethe, I find that to be so true experientially. Since I've written my first book, I feel like the process of writing my first book really changed me a lot. And similarly, he says, it's not, we don't create our ideas create us. Those are both two of his most famous quotes, and they're both in these collections of essays. And I think that's so true if you really just like reflect on it. Someone who goes around saying they're an optimist or something, I feel like you kind of default to the idea that like, oh yeah, like I've created this, that I'm an optimist, like I've decided to be an optimist, but like optimism has already existed in the world, and you've actually just kind of taken in that idea and made it part of your identity. So it is interesting, like you do just kind of have to be very mindful of what you want to receive and what you want to reject. It's interesting, like when you've taken something in like that, like a viewpoint, and you've had it for so long that it's become part of your identity, that you can no longer differentiate an idea from your identity. Just saying idea and identity, I'm noticing they must have similar Latin or Greek roots, which is interesting too. It was such a fascinating book. I could definitely go on and on about it. He talks, there was another amazing quote actually. He says, at the very end of the book, in the last essay, he says, I'm a Democrat, but I know that nature is aristocratic and esoteric, which I thought was like very profound. Basically just meaning like, I would like for things to be more equal, maybe I'll push for things to be more equal, but I do also understand that like the world is not a fair place, and I also understand that most people will never understand how the world works. And self-included. He spends a lot of time talking about religion and spirituality, and how basically we moved away from ever discussing anything that can't be proved absolutely through the natural sciences. And he makes a lot of other arguments that you can't necessarily prove that God doesn't exist, kind of the classic atheist-theist arguments. And he also spends a lot of time comparing our minds to like the archaic mind of man, and that he's spent a lot of time with Native Americans, and that they have such a different logic than us, which is just as true for them. I don't know. He also critiques the West a lot, and that we always have desire for more things. Anyway, I'm running out of time.